Hi everyone, I'm Laura and you're here for mobility from the ground up. Today we are going to be looking at mobility specifically for deadlifting. So deadlift is a very specific move that a trainer might teach at the gym or you might try at the gym. But while it is an exercise, it can also be really powerful move to keep your spine healthy when you're picking things up in your daily life. We're always all picking things up off the floor, and this is a really safe way, if done right, to pick up heavy things. But a lot of us don't have the mobility or the core stability to do a deadlift well. So that's what we're going to work on. We're going to look at what I'm considering the two cornerstones today that we're going to talk about of deadlift, which is core stability and hip mobility. All right, so let's get started. First off, what is a deadlift? If you've never seen a deadlift before, we're just going to do a body weight motion here, and it looks something like this. You're going to reach your hips back as the torso comes forward, and then you're going to stand back up. We're just going to do this a few times. If you have a mirror available, I recommend you looking at it from the side view, because a lot of times we think we're doing this, but for most people I work with, they're not doing this. I'm making a Pac-Man shape with my torso and upper leg. What most people tend to do is this. And a lot of times people are told to lift with your back, not with your knees, so the knees come forward, or lift with your knees, not with your back. And that's this here. And that's because most people don't have the hip mobility to access their powerful hip strength. So if you have a mirror, practice this a couple times. I'm going to give you a drill here as well. So this is the mobility part. And coordination as well. Are you coordinated enough to make this motion and not have the knees drift forward? What I'm going to have you do here, this basket here is simulating a wall because I'm pretty far from all the walls here. I'm just going to try to get my wall not to move here. And I want you, if you're close, if you're in an office or at home, it's likely you have a wall nearby. I want you to have your back toward the wall. Again, this is to really work on the coordination of that hip mobility. I want you to, your foot's going to be about 8 inches, 12 inches away from the wall, and you're going to try and touch your butt to the wall. So it's a simple reaching back. Simple does not always mean easy, but we're reaching back with our hips toward the wall and trying to tap it. If you're not even getting close to the wall, then back your heels up just a little bit. A little goes a long way, and try to hit the wall that way. All right. The nice thing about having a sturdy wall is that it'll catch you if you fall back into it. Something on the wheels will not. If you are touching it really easily, in just really small little steps forward, and try to really reach those hips back toward the wall behind you. So if you're touching it and not feeling any stretch in the back of the leg, then maybe try to inch forward again. And by inch, I mean centimeter, little movements forward, and really find a challenge zone, a zone that makes you work for it, but is still not causing you to fall backwards. You can also reach your arms out in front of you if you feel like you're going to fall backwards, because this will counterbalance the weight of your hips going back, so you can kind of more comfortably find that Goldilocks zone. The longer your upper leg is and torso is, the bigger this move will look backwards. If you have a shorter frame, like so shorter femurs, shorter torso, it'll look a little bit more compact than this. All right, so we've played with that. That's our first drill. Just focusing on this. You might have noticed that if your knees come forward, you're not going to touch the wall with your butt. So the knees have to stay vertical here as you work on this drill, this standing hip mobility. We're going to bring it down to the floor. and work on our hip mobility a little bit. And I have a couple yoga blocks. Use books for this, a cushion. It doesn't even need to be this tall. I'm gonna lay them down next to each other like this. And I'm gonna put my knees up on the blocks. So hands on the floor, knees up on the blocks. Notice here that when my knees are up on the blocks, it more closely mimics the vertical shin that I asked for in the hip hinge. So if you're here, you can work on a couple rocks back. We don't get this much knee flexion generally in a deadlift, but it's still a nice way to take the load off the hips and still work on that hip hinge, which is what we worked on when we were trying to reach our hips toward our wall. Just a couple more here. And we're going to come off the blocks. If you have high blood pressure or heart complications, bolster your shoulders and head up, make cushions, yoga blocks, whatever it may be, yoga mats you've seen me use before, so that your head is above your heart. And we're going to do our knee draw-ins here. I'm going to draw my right knee in, and then my left knee. Again, we're working on that hip flexion. I want you to see that you have the ability to bring the front of your leg, upper leg, towards your torso, even if we may not have the strength and coordination right now. Drawing in. One more time each side. We've got right and got left. Good. All right, and then we're gonna sit up and work, again, working on a little bit more hip mobility here. We'll do this in this crab, often called a crab position. So you're going to have, my feet are about hip width apart, and I'm just gonna send my knees side to side. This is not the hip position we take in a deadlift, but many of our hips are just so tight, there's not a lot of motion happening. So we wanna open up those hips. These are sometimes called windshield wipers. We're taking these from the right to the left. Now, we've been working on hip mobility, but another key piece in a deadlift is core stability. You can have all the hip mobility you want, but if you're not stable through your core in a deadlift, when you're lifting up a heavy object, you could hurt your low back. So we really want to really hone in on that core mobility, stability. And so we're going to do it here as well. So a lot of times when I see people do this mobility exercise, what I'll see is the hip will pick up. Great, love it. It's fun, feels good. But what we're going to do now is you're just going to try and move at the hip joint and keep the core stable. Keep the pelvis there. So when I'm talking about our core here in this move, it's from basically take your legs, take your arms, take your head off. That's your core. Your whole torso, from the hips up to the shoulders, is your core. We need it to be stable. So from the side view, it looks like this. So a lot of times, like I said, hips will pick up in this one. But the other thing that can happen when we're trying to not move the pelvis is we'll kind of arch as well. So we'll kind of lift the chest up. I see this a lot in a deadlift. There's a place for it in a deadlift, but for most people, that arch is going to exacerbate low back issues, especially if you get into lifting any type of weight. So we're going to let the chest come down, let the rib cage kind of relax into the body. So we're trying to not arch or fold as we do this. If you need to put something under your hips, go for it. And you can pause here. If you come back and look at this later, put something under your hips and do the same move here, and that might help you keep that core stability as you work on this hip mobility. All right, the next core stability move that we're gonna do is another one from the knees. Now again, because I'm trying to, it's not exactly the same motion, but in this knee hand position, I wanna, again, simulate the vertical shin as much as possible. Again, this is not perfectly like a deadlift here, but we're trying to get that knee-hip relationship solidified as we stabilize our core. So we're going to engage the core. You've probably done a bird dog before. This is a bird dog, opposite arm and opposite leg reach out simultaneously. And what we're trying to do here, because in a deadlift, you're lifting weight with your arms, you're moving your hips back, your knees are bending a little bit, and your core is trying to stay stable. So with the bird dog, it allows us to work on core stability as our joints move around it. So I'm engaging my core. It's almost like I've created like a little mini belt around my lumbar especially. But a lot of times, take a break, give your hands a rest. I showed you in the deadlift, a lot of times what I'll see for the knees is this. And a lot of times what I'll see in the back is either a rounding to pick something up. Some of that is hip mobility. You don't have the hip mobility to get down there, so we'll round to get down there. But the other one that I see a lot, especially when people are deadlifting for an exercise and not in their daily life, is that they'll arch their backs a lot. So there'll be a lot of this happening, and this is not a very stable position for a lumbar spine. So what I'm going to have you do is come back that kneeling bird dog position, all fours here. And as you're reaching out with your arms and legs, especially if you have a mirror, watch, can you keep yourself from rounding or arching? You'll figure out which one you're doing. If you go nice and slow and use a mirror. Mirrors are not a replacement for experienced person watching you, but if you know what to look for, sometimes you can see things that you can't feel that you're doing. So mirrors your friend. It's a lot of times it's a better set of eyes than our feeling sensation within our bodies. So how is it this time? Are you able to keep the torso steady and simultaneously lift opposite arm, opposite leg? If the answer is yes, great. I'm going to give you a challenge here. If the answer is no, I'm going to have you do a regression here. So if you found yourself arching or kind of, a lot of times I'll also see people like shifting around a lot as they do it, or leaning to one side, rotating. So what I'm going to have you do, if that's you, a lot of times it's just upper arm strength and being able to find that strength. So I'm going to have you reach back and do the regression before we do the progression. We're going to have you reach back with one leg, this is my right leg, and see if there's any tilting or tipping with the right leg. See how that engages your core. Hold it out there for 5 seconds and then bring it back in. Second leg, is there any tipping or tilting when we're on one leg? We're engaging the core, trying to keep our stability through the core. And if you want to, back on that right leg, find the stability, and then you can kind of walk that left hand out. Even if it's just fingertips on the ground, that can usually give people a little bit more support to be able to accomplish this. So left, hold it, and then take the fingers out. Your progression here is to go out and lift the back toe, maintaining core stability, and then lower the back toe and bring it back in. So you can play with that a little bit. We're going to go back up to standing position for our deadlift here. And we're going to do another drill to test this core stability now. So I want you to put your pinkies on the hip bones in the front, and then your thumbs will span up towards your rib cage. So we're kind of we're spanning the hand, pinkies on the bottom, thumbs at the top across the abdominal. So what a lot of people traditionally think is the core, this is going to specifically look at our stability through our lumbar region here. So you're going to do your deadlift, reaching the hips back. And what I want you to notice now that your hands are here is as you're doing both the motion back with the hips and forward with the hips, are you rounding? You'll feel kind of the thumbs come together with the pinky if you're rounding a lot, which is a loss of core stability. The other one you might feel is that you might arch the low back, keep like this, right? That's an extension of the spine, and you'll feel your hips or your rib cage move away from the other. So we want this sensation that you have in the hands here to be the same through the whole motion. Maybe your pinkies kind of get caught up in the hip flexion, but there's a difference between getting your pinkies kind of squeezed during that hip flexion than having it rounded or extended, so that flexion or extension of the spine. How did that feel? Play with it a little bit. And once you've played with it, you can pause now if you want to play with that. Or you can take this drill and take it to the wall. So we're combining our two drills now. So I still have my pinkies on my hips, thumbs up on my rib cage. I'm going to try to find that wall. Is it there? I found it. Okay. Like, is it there? So we found the wall. So you're trying to find that that Goldilocks zone where you can touch, but you're being challenged and you're able to maintain. If you're losing your core stability as you reach back for the wall, it's likely you're too far away for your current hip range of motion and movement pattern abilities. And that's fine. Just back up a little bit more so that you can combine these two moves. Handstand on the abdominals and the hip hinge to wall. Now, if you have a rolling cart like this, you might roll your cart back. All right, let's come back down and we're going to go through these moves again, and then we'll deadlift. And actually, let's start with, since we've been practicing a few times here, let's start with our deadlift. If you found that you really liked the wall or you really liked the hands, you can keep doing that, but you don't have to as we do this. If you like the hands, you're not going to be able to pick something up though. So I'm using 8 pounds ball here. So just kind of a weight that will make me work, but it's not going to be a huge danger to me if I pick it up wrong. So if you're feeling like, oh, I don't feel that strong or that comfortable, just to continue doing body weight, or you could do bottles of water. If you're regularly picking up grocery bags off the floor, you'll probably be fine with at least 5 pounds as to practice your deadlift. Now I mentioned last week we did mobility for gardening, and the deadlift played into this. We're really honing in on the deadlift today. But if you watched that, you probably saw that I straddled the weight that I was picking up. Anytime you want to get as close to your weight as possible in a deadlift, and we're going to reach our hips back toward the wall if you're using the wall. Try to engage the core and pick the weight up. Good. And then put it back down. I put my 8-pound ball on a stack of yoga blocks here. This minimizes how much range of motion that I need in order to get the ball. So as I'm warming up here, or as you're getting used to a move, I'd rather you bring the weight up a little bit to meet your hip mobility where it's at. And then once you are like, oh, I have the hip mobility, this feels good, I can keep my core stable, then you can take it down a level. Put it here, and I have this hip mobility, and I can lift it up from here. So now that I have that, I can lift it up here. So I know that I can pick things up from the floor as long as they don't roll away from me with core stability because I have the hip mobility and strength there within that range of motion. So I can work from the floor. You might have this on a coffee table and you just get your shins all the way up to the coffee table. Good. All right. Let's go back to working on that hip mobility again and core stability. We're going to do our windshield wiper move once again. So we're going to go here, sitting on our butts, feet flat on the floor. You can have toes up if you want. If this bothers your knees, I'd actually recommend bringing your toes to the shin because the hang of the foot here can sometimes put a little extra pressure on the knee. So we're going to go side to side. Remember, we're keeping the pelvis on the ground here. We're working in a flexed position, a hip flexed position here, because most of us lack that range in that deep flexion. So to work on a little hip rotation and a hip flex position can kind of open up those hips for us. Nice. I'm going to bring my blocks back into it. As I'm going into my knee hand position. If you don't have the blocks, don't worry about it. If you've made it this far without blocks, you'll be fine. Still beneficial without them. So I'm tucking my toes, which mimics my feet flat on the floor. And I'm going to rock back. And again. So as we're rocking this time, you can think about your core stability. So when you're rocking back, what will generally happen as we get deeper into our hip flexion, do you tuck and round the tailbone? That's that rounded spine. How far can you send your hips back before you feel or see your tailbone tuck? I have a notebook here. I've got my notebook with my plan here. If you have something a little bit heavier like this that's flat, what you can do is put it on your low back. I love tactile feedback. It's a great way to feel things that you can't always see, especially if you don't have a mirror. But as I go back, can I keep that position on my low back and upper hips? And if I start to round, I'll feel it, or it'll start to, I can feel it sliding off here. So how far can you go back before you lose that core connection, the core stability? Because that's what this is. You're losing core connection in order to just eke out a little bit farther back. And I'd rather you keep the stability through the core than start to flex the spine. Good. Another drill, right? All right, we're gonna go into our bird dog now. And you can shake out the hands if you need to. I know that's not the funnest position for people. You can always use the old trick of rolling up, putting the heel of the hand up on the mat and or any surface, and the ball of the fingers, base of the fingers down on the floor. We're going to do our bird dog here. And you're going to try to engage the core here. Think belly button to spine without any rounding. And then reach out, opposite arm, opposite leg. If that's your version, this is that base version here. You can also do the reach with the toe up as a progression. I wouldn't recommend doing that if you don't feel stable in that first version. The other version is reaching out with just the leg and walking the fingertips forward. You can keep this leg pretty low too. You can just kind of hover above the ground. A lot of times reaching it really high will make us lose our core connection. So again, reach and walk the fingers, stay low. Working on that core stability. So find the variation that works for you. All right, we're going to come out of that. One more time, laying down on the back. And I've got my block under my head. We're going to work on that passive deep hip flexion. And last time I did it with my leg bent, which you absolutely can do if that feels better. If you extend your leg out and there's a lot of pressure in the low back, across the low back, put more stuff under your head and shoulders. Just bolster yourself up as high as you need to so you can straighten this leg, or you can always come here, which will take pressure off the low back as well. So we're bringing the knee in for a couple pulses here. And then switch sides. These are those knee draw-ins. Again, we're working deep hip flexion. And you might feel at a point once you hit, it could be here, could be way in here. It really depends on your body and your tension. As you draw the knee in, your tailbone might come up off the floor. So you might kind of have that tucking motion that we had in the rock on the knees. And that's okay here. Getting a little stretch for the low back, which generally feels nice. You could do 2 at a time as well. Draw in. And we're going to come up to do a couple more deadlifts. Now, before we lift the weight again, we're going to do a couple of our drills. And I'll give you another one, a little bonus one. So we'll do the hips to the wall drill first. Generally, when we do hips to the wall, the knees aren't going to come forward anyway, because we're competitive. A lot of people are, I'm going to touch that wall. I'm going to get as far away and touch that wall with my hips. So we're doing our hips to wall. You can do this, the fingers spanning the front of the abdomen, pinkies on the hips, thumbs up on the rib cage. Reach the hips back, maintaining that core stability. Another thing that you can do, I have yoga blocks here. My favorite place to do this here at the gym, use a bench, one of those adjustable weightlifting benches, or non-adjustable. Or if you're at home, use a coffee table. A coffee table that you can get your feet under usually works well unless you have a very short lower leg. So what you'll do is you'll come right up to, I have my feet around my yoga block stack. If you're at home, get under that, feet under the coffee table, or you can use a bench in the weight room. But what you're trying to do here, stack books, whatever might work, is send your hips back. And if you send your hips back and are unknowingly also sending your knees forward, what will happen is this. So I'll send back. Oh. So we know then, again, to really gain access to these big muscles on the backside of our hips, it's helpful to keep the shin more vertical. All right, so now I've got another drill. Just gonna do 3 more deadlifts here. See how it feels after we've worked a little bit on the mobility and stability. Bolster your weight up as much as you need to. Or another option is if you have your weight up high, pretend I just didn't lift that up. I just deadlifted that up. But if you have the weight already up higher, you can just start your deadlift from up here and then come back up. So let's just get a couple deadlifts here. If you have a weight, try and keep the weight grazing the front of your legs, that entire motion. That'll help protect your low back too. Always be pretending like you're putting it down. You want to put it down right in between your ankles. Right. Let it deadlift it all the way to the floor now. And that is the end of our deadlift mobility class. I hope those last couple reps there felt like you had more mobility for the hips, more stability through the torso, and everything's just a little bit more coordinated as you did this work. If you have any questions, pop in, let us know, and hope to see you again soon. Bye.